Before a cattle outfit left Texas for the northern markets in the spring of 1880, someone sat down with a pencil and a piece of paper and calculated the weight of food required to keep between 8 and 15 men alive and functional for 90 to 120 days across terrain that offered no resupply, no store, and no guarantee that the water at the next known hole had not gone alkaline or dried up since the last crew passed through. The commissary calculation that resulted from that planning session determined every single thing a cowboy put in his mouth from departure to delivery, and it was not guesswork. Trail outfitters who got the calculation wrong produced crews that weakened, mutinied, or arrived at the railhead with the physical capacity of men who had been slowly starved for 3 months. The ones who got it right, who understood the specific caloric mathematics of outdoor labor in summer heat, the protein requirements of men riding 10 to 14 hours a day, and the preservation chemistry of food that had to remain edible without refrigeration across a season, produced trail drives that functioned as the industrial-scale livestock operations they were designed to be. According to research by historian Ramon Adams, whose 1952 study, Come and Get It, the story of the old cowboy cook, remains the most comprehensively documented account of trail cooking practices. A typical trail outfit in 1880 budgeted between 75 cents and $1 per man per day for provisions. A figure that sounds modest until it is multiplied across a crew of 12 men for 100 days and then translated into the specific weights and volumes of the food items that dollar figure had to cover. The result was a chuckwagon packed to a specific and documented load that left almost no room for the improvisation that popular accounts of trail life have consistently over-romanticized. In this video, you will discover the specific engineering invention that made the long cattle drive of the 1880s operationally possible, and that was documented as the creation of a single Texas rancher in a single year. The fuel problem that the treeless Great Plains imposed on trail cooking, and the specific solution that Chuckwagon design incorporated as a structural element of the vehicle itself. The exact nutritional calculation behind the dried fruit that trail outfitters packed despite its weight and cost, and what happened to crews whose outfitters skipped it, and the single food item that had been the centerpiece of trail cooking in the 1870s, but whose near total disappearance from the landscape by 1880 permanently altered the diet of every cowboy driving cattle north of the Red River. That last item went from being the most available free protein on the Great Plains to being effectively extinct within a decade, and the trail cook who had built his supplementary menu around it in 1873 had to find something else by 1880. The physical object that made organized trail cooking possible across distances of 500 to 1,000 miles was a vehicle that did not exist until 1866, when the Texas rancher Charles Goodnight modified a surplus United States Army wagon for the first drive of what became the Goodnight Loving Trail, J. Evetts Haley, whose 1936 biography, Charles Goodnight, Cowman and Plainsman, documented the trail's founding in detail drawn from Goodnight's own recollections, recorded that Goodnight's specific modification was the addition of a chuck box, a wooden cabinet fitted to the back of the wagon with a hinged lid that folded down on a swinging leg to form a work surface at waist height when the wagon was stopped. The chuck box was divided into compartments and drawers sized to hold specific supplies: flour in the largest compartment, coffee and sugar in smaller ones, salt, baking powder, lard, and the medical and first aid supplies that the cook also managed as part of his standard responsibilities. The chuck box gave the trail cook an organized weather-resistant storage system and a dedicated work surface that replaced the improvised cooking arrangements of earlier drives, where food preparation happened on the ground with whatever surface was available. That single engineering addition converted the cattle drive from a provisioning problem into a logistics system. The underside of the same wagon solved a problem that the chuck box alone could not address: fuel. The Great Plains that cattle drives crossed for 800 miles between Texas and the Kansas railheads or the northern Montana ranges in 1880 were, outside the river valleys, almost entirely without trees. A trail cook who needed a cooking fire 3 times a day for 90 days across the southern plains could not depend on finding wood in sufficient quantity along the route. The solution that Chuckwagon design incorporated was the cowhide hammocked underneath the wagon body between the axles, a storage net called by different names in different sources, including the possum belly, the cooney, or the caboose, into which dried buffalo dung was loaded at every opportunity as the drive moved across the plains. Buffalo chips, as this fuel was universally called in trail drive accounts, burned hot and relatively clean when dry, produced a fire adequate for cooking purposes, and were available in sufficient quantity across the Great Plains as long as the buffalo themselves had been recently present on the range. The trail cook who traveled with a full possum belly was self-sufficient in fuel across the treeless sections. The trail cook who did not maintain the possum belly faced cooking emergencies that the accounts of experienced hands described with a specificity that makes clear these were common and serious disruptions rather than minor inconveniences. Leave your like here if you had never heard that the fuel a trail cook burned under his Dutch oven for 3 months across the Great Plains was primarily dried buffalo manure stored in a cowhide hammock under the wagon, and that the design of the Chuckwagon specifically accounted for this as a standard fuel source. The central daily production of the trail cook, more than any other single item, was biscuits. Not occasionally, not as a treat, but 3 times a day across the entire length of the drive. Ramon Adams documented the Dutch oven biscuit production of the trail cook with a technical precision that establishes it as skilled work rather than simple baking. The trail cook's Dutch oven was a cast iron pot with a flat lid whose rim was designed to hold hot coals above the biscuits, while additional coals burned under the pot, creating an enclosed heat environment that functioned as a field oven. The specific technique required managing 2 separate heat sources simultaneously, adjusting the coal distribution above and below to produce bottom heat sufficient to set the base of the biscuits without burning them, and top heat sufficient to brown the tops without leaving the centers raw. A cook who got this balance wrong 3 times a day produced food that the crew ate because they had no alternative, and resented with a consistency that trail drive accounts document in personal diaries and letters with remarkable emotional intensity. A cook who got it right produced the single food item that experienced cowboys in 1880 consistently identified, when asked about trail food, as the one thing they remembered positively. The biscuit was the trail cook's professional credential, and the quality of his biscuits was the primary criterion by which trail bosses evaluated and hired cooks in the cattle towns of Dodge City and Abilene at the beginning of each drive season. The sweetener that accompanied those biscuits and that appeared in the trail cook's preparations for every meal in some form was not sugar. It was molasses. Called lick by the cowboys who consumed it, molasses in 1880 was cheaper than refined sugar, preserved better in the heat and humidity of a summer drive, and provided a density of calories that its sweetness disguised. A tablespoon of molasses contains approximately 60 calories, and a trail cook who used molasses liberally in his cooking was adding caloric density to every meal in a form that cost less to transport per calorie than any alternative sweetener available through the trail commissary system. The molasses barrel was a standard element of every Chuckwagon load, documented in the provisioning records that historians of the trail drive era have assembled from surviving ranch accounts, and its appearance in those records across multiple outfits and multiple seasons establishes it not as an occasional luxury, but as a structural component of the trail diet, with the same status as flour and coffee. Cowboys who were asked decades later about the taste of trail food consistently mentioned molasses, sometimes fondly and sometimes with the specific fatigue of a flavor consumed in the same form every day for 3 months. The fat that made biscuits edible, that fried the bacon and the occasional fresh game, that greased the Dutch oven before each baking cycle, and that served as the base for the gravies and pan sauces that gave the trail cook's production whatever variety it possessed was lard. Rendered pork fat was packed on every trail drive in quantities that the provisioning mathematics required, and that modern nutritional assumptions would classify as extreme. A crew of 12 men frying in lard 3 times a day across 90 days consumed lard at a rate that trail provisioning records, analyzed by historians of the period including David Derry in his 1981 study Cowboy Culture, document as a standard line item in trail budgets, ranking in importance alongside flour and coffee. The specific function of lard in the trail diet extended beyond cooking fat. Cowboys who worked in sun and wind for 12 hours a day developed cracked and bleeding hands and faces within weeks of a drive. Lard applied to cracked skin reduced the pain and slowed the progression of the cracking, in the same way that any occlusive barrier cream functions, and trail hands who did not have access to commercial salves, which were expensive and heavy, used the same cooking fat that flavored their biscuits to manage the occupational dermatology of their work. The Chuckwagon was not a restaurant. It was a mobile industrial kitchen designed to keep a labor force functional, and every item on it served that functional purpose with an economy of weight and cost that left no room for anything that could not justify its presence in caloric or operational terms. The item on the Chuckwagon, whose presence was most directly connected to the long-term health of the crew rather than to its immediate caloric needs, was dried fruit. Prunes and dried apples were packed on trail drives in 1880 not as a concession to taste preference, but as a medical calculation. Trail drive physicians and experienced trail bosses understood from practical observation, without the benefit of the vitamin C biochemistry that would not be formally characterized until the 1930s, that crews on long drives without fruit or vegetables developed a specific pattern of physical deterioration, including fatigue, joint pain, and in severe cases the gum inflammation and wound healing failures that 19th century medicine recognized as scurvy symptoms. The dried fruit that outfitters packed represented the most weight-efficient method available in 1880 for delivering the plant-based nutrients that prevented that deterioration. Canned tomatoes, which by 1880 were available through the same wholesale supply system that provided canned goods to trail outfits across Texas and Kansas, served a similar function and were documented in trail provisioning records from the period as a standard, if relatively expensive, item on longer drives. A trail outfit that skipped the dried fruit and the canned tomatoes to save weight or cost was making a financial calculation against the health of its crew that experienced trail bosses recognized as false economy. A crew showing scurvy symptoms in the 7th week of a 10-week drive was a crew that could not perform the physical work that the drive required at the moment when it needed full capacity most. The protein supplement that trail cooks of the early 1870s had built into their supplementary cooking through opportunistic hunting had effectively disappeared from the southern Great Plains by 1880, and the speed of that disappearance represents one of the most rapid ecological collapses documented in North American wildlife history. The American bison population of the southern plains, estimated at several million animals in 1870, had been reduced by the commercial hide hunters, operating with high-powered rifles from the late 1860s onward to a fraction of that number by the early 1880s. A trail cook driving up the Western Trail from Texas to Dodge City in 1873 could supplement his crew's diet with fresh buffalo meat hunted along the route with minimal effort. The same trail in 1880 offered essentially no buffalo. The hide hunters had cleared the southern herd before the northern herd followed in the mid-1880s. What replaced buffalo as the supplementary wild protein available on the 1880 trail was smaller and less calorie-dense prairie chickens, hunted with whatever firearms the crew carried, and antelope, which required more effort per animal than buffalo had required because of their greater wariness and smaller carcass size. The specific impact of this ecological shift on trail diets between 1873 and 1883 is documented indirectly in the trail accounts of the period through what disappears from the descriptions of supplementary cooking rather than through what appears. The water that a trail crew consumed every day of the drive, cooked with and made their coffee from, was rarely the clean, neutral water that any description of adequate daily hydration assumes. The creek water and pond water available along the established trail routes of the southern and central plains varied from acceptable to actively dangerous in ways that the trail cook managed through the chemistry of the cooking process rather than through any filtering or purification technology that 1880 provided. The specific alkalinity of water sources across the southern plains, high in dissolved sodium and magnesium carbonates from the geology of the region, produced water with a soapy or bitter taste that was unpleasant to drink and that caused gastrointestinal distress when consumed in quantity over multiple days. The trail cook's response to alkaline water, documented in multiple first-hand accounts of drives through the Texas Panhandle and across the Llano Estacado, was to increase the coffee concentration beyond what any modern coffee drinker would recognize as a beverage and toward what the trail accounts describe as a liquid that could almost stand unsupported. The tannins and organic acids in heavily concentrated coffee partially neutralize the alkaline mineral content of the water, making it more palatable and reducing the immediate gastrointestinal effects. The specific technique for settling the grounds in a trail coffee pot after boiling, which involved either allowing the pot to cool and the grounds to sink before pouring or adding a small amount of cold water or an eggshell to the boiling pot to accelerate settling, was a procedural detail that every experienced trail cook had standardized as part of the morning coffee production that began before dawn and that the crew had consumed before the first cattle were moved. Can you spend 90 days drinking water that tastes like laundry soap, eating biscuits and molasses at every meal, with no fresh vegetable except an occasional canned tomato, and still perform 10 to 14 hours of physical outdoor labor every day? Because that is the documented nutritional reality of the 1880 cattle trail, and the men who completed those drives were neither exceptional physical specimens nor indifferent to the monotony. They were workers doing a seasonal job in conditions whose specific discomforts the accounts they left behind describe with a candor that the romanticized image of the cowboy has systematically suppressed. The cook who managed that nutritional reality across the length of a drive occupied a position of authority within the crew, whose formal basis was the trail boss's payroll, but whose practical basis was the biological dependence of every member of the crew on what the cook chose to produce. Ramon Adams documented the specific social protocols that trail tradition had developed around the cook's authority. No one touched the cook's equipment without permission. No one took food before the cook announced it ready. No one criticized the food within the cook's hearing, and the cook's word on the placement of the wagon and the timing of meals was accepted as a logistical decision rather than challenged as a personal preference. These were not informal customs. They were operational rules of the trail drive that experienced cowboys followed as automatically as they followed the rules about night watch. Violations had consequences that the cook enforced through the one power he held absolutely: the quality and quantity of what he chose to serve to the person who had offended him. A cowboy who insulted the cook publicly might find his portions reduced, his biscuits consistently less cooked than everyone else's, or his coffee consistently cooler than the cup poured for the man sitting next to him. These small adjustments were unverifiable and undeniable, and the experienced cowboy who understood the hierarchy of the trail understood that the cook was not a servant of the crew. He was the crew's most critical skilled worker, whose technical competence determined whether the outfit arrived at the railhead with men capable of working or with men who had spent the last 3 weeks eating food that punished them for every mile they covered. The deference his position commanded was the practical recognition of a fact that no amount of cowboy mythology about the gun and the horse has managed to obscure in the accounts of men who actually drove cattle. On the trail, the most powerful man in the outfit after the trail boss was the one who controlled the fire. If this video showed you a trail kitchen whose specific mathematics, engineering, and nutritional calculations were more precisely documented than any popular version of this story has ever admitted, subscribe to the channel. Next week, the physical records of what the cattle town of Dodge City actually provided to the trail crews who arrived after 3 months on the road reveal a commercial economy built almost entirely on reversing the caloric and sensory deprivations that the trail had imposed.